The wind over the Burren didn't howl, it shrieked, a thin, tearing sound that scraped against the exposed limestone pavement like a rusty blade. Elias wiped the mixture of rain and sweat from his eyes, his boots slipping on the treacherous, fissure-riddled ground. He shouldn't have been out here. The storm warnings were severe, and the light was failing, turning the gray landscape into a flat, monochrome nightmare. But the anomaly on the satellite scan had been too precise to ignore. A perfect, rectangular void in the chaotic geology of County Clare. He found it wedged into a deep grike, a fissure in the limestone floor, hidden beneath a tangle of wind-warped hazel scrub. It wasn't limestone, it wasn't sandstone. It was a slab of rock blacker than a closed eye, sucking the dim twilight into itself. It stood about 4 feet high, jagged at the top as if it had been snapped like a dry twig. Elias dropped to his knees, ignoring the sharp bite of the rocks through his trousers. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it, the Ogham inscriptions he'd spent a lifetime chasing. "Beautiful," he whispered, the words snatched away by the wind. He reached out, his gloved fingers trembling. He brushed the moss away from the central ridge of the stone, the fleshy part where the ancient script would be carved. There were notches, deep, violent slashes cut into the corner of the stone. But they weren't weather-worn. They looked wet. They looked fresh. He pulled off his glove to trace the markings with his bare skin. He needed to feel the depth, the angle. He traced the first character, Beth, the letter B. He traced the second, Louis, the letter L. As his index finger slid down the sharp volcanic edge of the stone, he slipped. It wasn't a clumsy movement, but it felt guided. The stone seemed to lurch just a millimeter into his hand. The jagged edge sliced deep into the pad of his thumb, down to the bone. "Damn it!" Elias hissed, recoiling, clutching his hand to his chest. Blood welled up, dark and hot, overflowing the cut. A heavy drop splashed onto the black rock. Elias reached for his field kit to grab a bandage, but movement caught his eye. He froze. The drop of blood didn't run down the face of the stone. It didn't streak or drip. It sank. The black rock was porous, like a sponge made of obsidian. The red droplet hit the surface and vanished instantly, sucked into the microscopic capillaries of the mineral. Then, a sound. It was faint, buried beneath the shrieking wind, but Elias heard it. A wet, slurping noise. A suction. He stared at the stone. The deep, violent notches of the Ogham script were pulsing. For a second, just a heartbeat, the gray-black carvings flushed with a dull crimson light. A sudden, sickening heat shot up Elias's arm, traveling from his bleeding thumb, past his wrist, and burying itself deep in the marrow of his elbow. It wasn't the throb of a cut. It felt like something living was swimming upstream through his veins. He scrambled backward, his breath hitching in his throat. He stared at his thumb. The bleeding had stopped, instantly. But the wound wasn't closed. The edges of the sliced skin weren't pink or red. They were gray, a hard, flat, slate gray. He touched the skin around the cut. It didn't feel like flesh. It felt cold. It felt gritty. It felt like stone. And the stone in the fissure, it seemed to loom larger in the twilight. The Ogham script was no longer static. The shadows within the carvings were writhing, shifting, rewriting themselves. Elias grabbed his pack, a primal terror seizing his gut. He needed to get back to the cottage. He needed light. He needed whiskey. He needed to cut this gray, dead thing out of his thumb before it spread. As he turned to run, the sensation in his elbow flared, a burning, scratching itch, as if someone was carving a message into his bone from the inside. He didn't remember the run back to the car. It was a fugue state of adrenaline and stumbling panic, his boots sliding on the wet limestone pavement, his breath tearing at his throat like swallowed glass. The only thing he was acutely, horrifyingly aware of was the weight of his left arm. It swung at his side, not with the natural rhythm of running, but with a dead, heavy inertia, like a pendulum of lead. He fumbled with his keys, dropping them twice in the mud. When he finally wrenched the door of his rusted Land Rover open, the interior light flickered on, a weak, yellow sanctuary against the encroaching dark of the Burren. He scrambled inside, slamming the door and locking it, as if the wind itself were a predator trying to pry its way in. He sat there for a moment, chest heaving, the smell of damp upholstery and old coffee grounding him. It's just a cut, he told himself, a bad reaction, some kind of mineral toxicity in the rock, or a hallucinogenic moss spore. He looked down at his left hand. The cabin light was dim, but it was enough. The gray patch on his thumb hadn't stopped at the knuckle. It had crept down, consuming the thenar eminence, the fleshy mound at the base of the thumb. The skin there was no longer skin, it was a flat, matte slate gray. The pores were gone, the fine hairs were gone. He touched it with his right index finger. It was cold, not the cold of skin exposed to the wind, but the deep, radiating chill of a stone pulled from a riverbed. He pressed his fingernail into the gray flesh. Click. A sound like tapping a ceramic tile. There was no give, no elasticity, no sensation. Elias stared, his mind reeling, trying to force the impossible image into a rational framework. Gangrene? Necrosis? Rapid calcification? Then, the itch in his elbow flared again. It wasn't an itch, it was a vibration, a low-frequency grinding, vibrating down the ulna and radius bones of his forearm. He rolled up his sleeve. He screamed. It was a short, strangled sound that died in the confines of the car. Beneath the pale, freckled skin of his inner forearm, something was moving. It looked like a dark worm burrowing through muscle, but the movement was jerky, angular. It was pushing the skin up, stretching it taut, and it was leaving a trail. Where the worm passed, the skin didn't settle back down. It hardened. It turned that same dead slate gray. And the shape. Elias watched, paralyzed, as the dark presence under his skin slashed to the right, then sharply down, then left. It was carving a shape, a straight line with 3 diagonal notches intersecting it. Nang, the Ogham letter for reed, or gorse. The stone wasn't just infecting him, it was writing on him. "Get it out," he hissed, the panic shattering his paralysis. "Get it out! Get it out!" He scrambled for the glove compartment. He knew he had a multi-tool in there, a Leatherman. He threw the manual and a tire gauge onto the passenger seat, his fingers closing around the cold steel of the tool. He flipped the blade out. It wasn't sterile. He didn't care. He looked at his forearm. The dark burrower was pausing near his wrist, pulsing. The gray trail behind it was hardening, the skin turning to rock before his eyes. Cut it out, sever the nerve, stop the spread. He gripped the knife in his right hand. His left arm felt alien now, heavy and numb, resting on the steering wheel like a slab of meat. He gritted his teeth, braced himself for the pain, and drove the point of the knife into the pale skin just ahead of the burrowing shape. The blade pierced the skin. Red blood welled up. Normal, warm, red blood. He saw the dark shape under his skin recoil. It didn't like the steel. "Got you," Elias snarled, sweat stinging his eyes. He dug deeper, trying to hook the thing, to drag it into the light. The knife tip hit something hard. Not bone, something harder. The vibration in his arm spiked to a deafening screech inside his skull. The dark shape surged forward, not away from the knife, but toward it. The gray discoloration exploded outward from the wound. It moved faster than blood. In a second, the red incision turned gray. The blood dripping from it sizzled, turning into falling dust before it hit his jeans. The gray wave washed over the knife blade. Elias tried to pull the knife out, but it was stuck. No. He watched horrified as the gray stain raced up the steel of the blade. It consumed the metal, turning the shiny silver into dull, porous stone. It reached the handle. He let go, dropping the tool. It clattered onto his lap. It wasn't a knife anymore. It was a fossil, a perfect stone replica of a Leatherman, fused to a jagged chip of stone that had once been his own blood. The infection on his arm surged past the elbow. The heavy, dead sensation swallowed his bicep. And then, the whispering started. It wasn't a sound in the car. It was the grinding of his own bones, vibrating against his inner ear, translating friction into syllables. Not ink, the vibration ground out. Flesh is better paper. Elias scrambled for the door handle, shoving the car door open with his good shoulder. He fell out onto the wet gravel, the rain lashing his face. He needed help. He needed a hospital. He needed an amputation. He tried to push himself up. His left arm didn't bend. He looked down. His sleeve had torn in the fall. His entire left arm, from the shoulder down to the fingertips, was gray. It was rigid. The texture was rough, pitted like limestone. And, carved deep into the stone flesh of his forearm, glowing with a faint, sick pulse, was a long, vertical line with notches cut across it. A sentence. A name. He tried to move his fingers. Nothing happened. He was lugging a 20-pound statue attached to his shoulder. He stumbled toward the cottage lights, cradling the dead weight of his arm. But as he took a step, his left knee buckled, not from weakness, from stiffness. He felt the grinding in his hip, the itch, the burrowing. It was traveling through his skeleton. Elias hit the gravel hard. The impact jarred his teeth, but his left side felt nothing. It was like dropping a statue. His left arm rang against the stones with a dull, hollow clack, and his left leg, now seized from hip to ankle, acted as a brutal anchor, dragging him down into the mud. He tried to scream, but the air in his lungs felt thin, displaced by a growing, suffocating pressure in his chest. He rolled onto his back, the rain lashing his face, blurring the world into streaks of gray and black. He looked down at his leg. The denim of his jeans was torn at the knee. Beneath the fraying blue cotton, there was no blood, no white bone of a compound fracture. There was only the dark, glistening sheen of wet slate. The gray infection had consumed his boot, his calf, his thigh, and it was moving fast, racing up his flank toward his ribs. A tall page. The vibration ground through his pelvis, the sound of tectonic plates shifting deep underground. A strong vellum. No, Elias gasped, scrabbling at the wet gravel with his good hand, his right heel digging a furrow in the driveway. He pushed himself backward, inch by agonizing inch, toward the cottage door. I am not a rock. He was dragging half a ton of dead weight. His own body was becoming his tomb. He reached the wooden step of the porch. He hooked his right hand over the edge, his fingernails digging into the damp wood, and pulled. His muscles screamed, the veins in his neck bulged. With a grunt of pure animal exertion, he hauled his heavy, petrifying torso up onto the decking. He collapsed there, panting. The cottage door was just feet away, the phone, the emergency radio. But the itch was no longer in his limbs. It was in his throat. It started as a dryness, a sudden parched sensation that swallowing couldn't fix. Then came the weight. His Adam's apple felt heavy, hard. The cartilage of his larynx was calcifying, turning from flexible tissue into brittle stone. He tried to cough, to clear the obstruction. Click, clack. The sound that came out wasn't a cough. It was the sound of two pebbles being banged together inside a cave. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded his remaining senses. He rolled onto his side, his good side,
and looked down at his chest. His shirt was open. The gray stain was spreading across his sternum like an ink spill on blotting paper. And in the center of his chest, right over the thudding, frantic rhythm of his heart, the skin was rippling. The worm was there, the invisible scribe. It was carving a circle. Elias watched, paralyzed by the impossibility of it, as the invisible stylus sliced through his skin, leaving the gray, stony trail behind. It completed the circle and then slashed a vertical line through it, then another. It wasn't just Ogham anymore, it was a map, a constellation. And as the carving passed over his heart, he felt the beat change. Thump, 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 thud, click, thud, click. His heart wasn't stopping, it was hardening. The valves were turning to flint. The chambers were becoming granite caves. "The ink is running out," the voice in his bones whispered. It sounded disappointed. "So little blood in this one." Elias realized then that the stone didn't want him to turn completely, not yet. It needed the blood to flow. It needed the liquid to make the stone spread. If his heart stopped beating, if it turned to stone too soon, the writing would stop. The scribe slowed down. The gray wave halted just below his neck. Elias lay on the porch, the rain drumming on his face, which still felt cold and wet, and on his legs, which felt nothing. He was half man, half monument. He needed to get inside.
He needed to what? There was no surgeon on earth who could carve him out of himself. A noise from the darkness. Not the wind, not the rain. Slurp. It came from the driveway, from the direction of the car. Elias strained his neck, the muscles stiff and grinding. A figure was pulling itself out of the mud where he had fallen. It was small, shaped like a badger or a fox, but it moved with a jerky, frantic gait. It scampered into the pool of light cast by the open car door. It was a hare, but it wasn't brown or furred. It was gray. It was sleek, shining stone. Its ears were pinned back, solidified in a streamlined shape. Its legs moved with the clack, clack, clack of stone on stone. And carved into its flank was a single, glowing red symbol. It paused, its stone head swiveling toward Elias. It had no eyes, just smooth, gray indentations, but it saw him. Then another sound, heavier, clump, drag, clump, drag. Out of the darkness of the lane, from the direction of the Greik, where he had found the broken pillar, something else was coming. It was a sheep, a ewe. It was fully petrified, a statue of a sheep, perfect in every detail of its wool, but carved from the same black, light-sucking rock as the pillar. It walked with a terrible, grinding lurch, its stone joints protesting against the movement. Its side was covered in script, rows and rows of notches. Elias stared, his mind fracturing. The pillar in the hole? It hadn't been snapped. It hadn't been broken by the wind. It had hatched. It had sent out its spores, its influence, turning the living things of the Burren into mobile pages, a library of stone animals wandering the limestone pavement. And now, they were coming for the new volume. The stone hare leaped onto the porch. It landed with a heavy thud near Elias's head. It didn't attack. It just sat there, a grotesque garden ornament, radiating that deep, geological cold. The sheep dragged itself to the bottom of the steps. It stood there, waiting.
"The congregation," the voice inside Elias rumbled. The vibration was in his jaw now. His teeth felt loose, rattling in sockets that were turning to rock. "We must finish the chapter."
The scribe on his chest moved again. It slashed upward toward his throat. Elias gagged, a dry clicking sound. He tried to crawl, to use his one good arm to drag himself through the door, but the gray infection on his chest surged outward, locking his right shoulder joint. His arm fell uselessly to the wood. He was paralyzed, trapped on his own doorstep. He could only move his head. He looked up at the sky, desperate for a star, a moon, anything but the gray rain. But the rain wasn't gray anymore. The drops falling on his face, they were heavy. They hit his skin with a hard tap. He blinked, his eyelids feeling heavy, like sandpaper scratching over his eyes. A raindrop landed on his lip. It didn't taste like water. It tasted metallic, dusty. He managed to focus his blurring vision on the railing of the porch. The rain falling there wasn't splashing. It was piling up. It wasn't rain. It was dust. Gray, fine stone dust falling from the sky like snow. The infection wasn't just in him. It wasn't just in the animals. The stone in the grike was rewriting the weather. The sky turns to stone, the voice intoned. The earth rises to meet it. Elias felt a sharp, piercing pain in his right eye. The scribe had reached his face. The needle didn't puncture his eye, it froze it. There was a moment of blinding, white-hot agony as the invisible scribe pierced the cornea, but it was instantly replaced by a heavy, dull numbness. Elias felt the vitreous jelly of his right eye harden, crystallizing into quartz. The darkness that swallowed his vision wasn't black. It was a flat, impenetrable gray. But he wasn't blind. As his left eye, still organic, still frantically weeping real tears, stared out at the dusty rain, his right eye, his stone eye, began to see something else. It saw the heat. It saw the weight. Through the lens of the stone, the world was a wireframe of stress lines and geological pressure. He saw the hair, not as a shape, but as a dense, heavy knot of gravity sitting on the porch. He saw the rain, not as water, but as falling chaotic static. And he saw the glowing red veins running through the limestone pavement, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic heartbeat that matched the grinding in his own chest. 2 eyes, the vibration in his skull grated, the sound of 2 millstones crushing grain. 1 for the sun, 1 for the dark. His jaw seized. The muscle turned to granite in mid-gasp. His mouth was locked open in a silent scream, a permanent rictus of terror. He felt his tongue heavy and cold in his mouth, a slug of lead. He couldn't breathe. He didn't need to. The oxygen in his blood had been replaced by dust. The panic of suffocation flared for a second, primal and desperate, before the stone washed over that part of his brain, smothering the fear with a cold, heavy apathy. Acceptance, the stone whispered. Stillness. Permanence. More shapes were emerging from the darkness. The congregation was growing. A badger, its fur rendered in sharp, jagged flint, dragged itself onto the decking. A crow, grounded and heavy, hopped with a sickening clack, clack, clack across the wooden planks, its wings fused to its sides. They gathered around him, a silent, heavy circle of witnesses. They were reading him. Elias felt the scribe on his chest finish its work. The carving was deep, cutting through the pectoral muscle, scraping against the ribs that were now fusing into a solid cage. The vibration stopped. The itch faded. The silence that followed was absolute. The wind still howled, but Elias could no longer hear it with his ears. His eardrums had calcified. He heard only the vibration of the ground, the deep, resonant thrum of the Burren itself. He was a statue, a fallen monument on the porch of a rented cottage. But his mind was still screaming. Trapped in the cooling magma of his brain, his consciousness was a frantic moth battering against the walls of a stone jar. "I am Elias. I am a professor. I have a daughter in Galway." "You are a page," the deep earth answered. The stone hare hopped closer. It tilted its eyeless head, inspecting the fresh carvings on Elias's chest. Then, slowly, agonizingly, it opened its mouth. It didn't have teeth. It had a ridge of sharp slate. It leaned forward and clamped its jaws onto Elias's stone finger, the index finger of his right hand, which was still clutching the porch railing. Snap. There was no pain, only a vibration of impact. The hare bit the finger clean off. Elias watched with his stone eye as the hare chewed the digit, grinding the stone to dust, and swallowed it. It was editing. "Too long," the voice murmured. "The sentence flows better without it." The sheep stepped forward next. It lowered its heavy head and rammed its horn against Elias's shin. Crack! A piece of his leg flaked away. They were sculpting him. They were refining the rough draft.
He was being eroded, chipped away, perfected into whatever shape the Ogham stone required. He wasn't just a book, he was an art project for a bored, ancient god. The dust rain fell harder, burying his legs, filling his open, screaming mouth. It tasted of iron and time. It filled his throat, choking off the last pathway to his lungs. He stared up with his living left eye. The vision was blurring, fading. The gray infection was creeping across the bridge of his nose. He saw a single, real snowflake mix with the stone dust, a tiny, fragile, melting thing. It landed on his cheek. For a second, he felt the cold wetness, a last kiss of the living world. Then the scribe touched his left pupil. The world went gray. The wetness turned to ice, then to stone. His thoughts slowed. The panic became heavy, sluggish. The memories of his daughter, of his work, of the taste of coffee, they didn't vanish. They just solidified. They became fossils in his mind, preserved but unreachable, buried under layers of sediment. He was no longer Elias. He was the stone man of the Burren. He was the record of the storm. He felt the hair settle on his chest, its cold weight comfortable, familiar. He felt the sheep lie down against his flank. He was part of the Greik now, part of the pavement. And he would wait here. He would wait for the next storm. He would wait for the next wanderer with warm blood and soft skin to come looking for secrets in the rock. And when they found him, when they brushed the moss from his chest to read the strange ancient markings carved there, he would be ready to write the sequel.